all, I thank the CII and Telangana Development Forum for inviting me. I'm not particularly politically popular in both the Telugu-speaking states because of an outspokenness. Therefore, I'm sure there are some political cause if you invite me. I have been especially asked to focus on decentralization. My own passion for local governance, delegation, decentralization is very well known. Therefore, I would not like to go into the theory of it and the passionate defense of why it's required. But I would like to cite a few examples, just to show what it really means, because we have to move from concepts to serious, substantive, institutional designs and consequences. Both Arun and Chakrapani talked about China, because if you talk about India and its growth story, or our aspirations, you cannot ignore China. Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, the rest of India, we have to take into account what happened there, what's happening there. One of the oft-repeated comments that we all hear is that China is a dictatorship and therefore they can get anything now. With due respect, I think it's absolute rubbish. I have always argued that wherever China acted dictatorially, they messed up colossally. Take the two or stunning examples, the great leap forward of the 1950s. I don't want to go into details of that, but as a consequence of Mao Zedong's folly, China lost 20 million people to starvation between 1958 and 61. One of the greatest human losses in quote-unquote peacetime in human history. It's because of dictatorship. In 1968 and around that period, the Cultural Revolution saw such vandalization that 90% of their cultural heritage, one of the greatest and oldest along with India civilizations, all that cultural heritage was lost. So dictatorship hurt China very deeply. It is the democratic impulses that actually made China grow dramatically. Our notion of democracy is voting, rasta roko, asking the chief minister, prime minister to resign, and abusing each other. I respectfully disagree. Sensible democracy is about accessing opportunities for human development, education, and healthcare. It's about localization of power. It's about transfer of technology to the local conditions and situations. And it's about making the public goods of importance in participation in economic activity like public transport, etc., available to everybody. These are democratizing tools. In each of these sectors, China has done much, much better than India, and India has done particularly badly by global standards. It's not because of a democracy that India has failed, it's because of lack of democracy where it matters. I want to emphatically make this point. This notion of democracy being detrimental to development is a lie, a big lie, a lazy lie. It is said that in the United States, you have the largest number of final decision-making authorities. It may be a small sphere of activity, but in that small sphere, there's somebody who is supreme and there's no appeal on that. For instance, Bill Clinton and his wife, after his presidency, moved into Harlem, New York. The body that should decide whether or not they should be permitted to live in their midst is the local residents association. They have no more powers, they have only that much power, but that power is absolute. That is the hallmark of decentralization. It's not that somebody is going to be another bully in place of another. It is that the stakeholders, they determine fully and finally in respect to those limited tasks. Whereas India arguably has the smallest number of final decision makers for a country of 130 crore, 1.3 billion population, and we all know the infinite diversity, linguistic, religious, caste, region, whatever. We have probably the most centralized society, and therefore the syndrome of PMCMD. Let me therefore cite a few examples. 4 sectors, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll mention one example each, or half example, quickly to make the point, because A group of this kind can easily understand what it really means. Telangana today, the greatest challenge is, I don't know if it's come up for discussion in the inaugural session, power sector. If you are pretending that everything because the government's policy, certification, removing inspector laws will have fantastic investment and jobs, we are lying to ourselves. There is a deep, deep power sector crisis in this state. And it is not a problem of generation. Another myth. It is a problem of the power sector's inherent unviability and mismanagement. There is about 9,000 crore annual deficit in power sector alone in this state. The numbers actually may increase. I'm talking with old numbers. Yesterday, I saw Andhra Pradesh, where I thought power sector was much better, showing 7,000 crore annual deficit. Therefore, Telangana may well have 12 or 13 or 14,000 crore deficit. I don't have the latest numbers. It's a pretty big deficit, 30 crores a day. A substantial part of it is because of terrible distribution management, disgraceful distribution management. No metering, no energy auditing, and therefore no capacity to set things right. You may have aggregate numbers as to what is wrong in the power sector, but where the leakage is, where the theft is, where the technical problems, if you don't understand, how do you fix it? If you know that 40% water is lost in the pipeline, if you don't know where exactly the leak is there, what can you do? You're going to write a story for the planning commission. But you cannot really set it right. It has to be necessarily disaggregated and decentralized. We tested this. 12 years ago, probably 15 years ago actually, 15 years ago, I tested this in Kandacheru in West Godavari district. We've taken a substation, bullied the government. After years of persuasion, they said, all right, you're not criticizing too much. Now take charge of it and show what you can do. In the midst of a very corrupt system, dysfunctional system without authority, my team has had the audacity to take the responsibility. I told them, look, you can't take responsibility without authority. It's a dangerous thing. They'll say you failed. But still, they insisted. They took it, and I'm glad they did it. And these are people like Mr. Vijayka, former Secretary, Government of India, Electronics, Mr. T.L. Shankar, former Electricity Board Chairman, and Mr. Tatarao, when he was alive. They were all involved in this. And they have improved distribution to a point where 18% losses were reduced. 18% of the total grid. Not the law, 18% of the losses, 18% of the total power is saved. Corruption was brought down to zero. The costs of managing the local situation like the transformers, the repairs, rewinding, so on and so forth, it came down to 20%, there's an 80% saving. And the time, if it took normally 2 to 3 days for such a service, it took 2 to 3 hours in this case. And 100% metering, including for all agricultural connections, was done by persuasion because people, once they saw the quality of services, they responded. All because of decentralized management, effective management, proper systems being built. So much so one day, there were no power outages. There were no voltage problems. No motors burning. Everybody in Telangana knows we have supposedly free power, but the amount of corruption involved in getting electricity connection and the number of times that your motors get burned and therefore you have to replace the capital equipment, everything, all the farmers know that. All that was a thing of the past. So much so, one day one mechanic, a local mechanic came to me and said, sir, until you fellows came, I had 2 or 3 motors every day for repair before I had plenty of money to make. In Telugu, he said, because there is no motor to be repaired. I told him, look, you have skill, therefore you always find work of another kind. Your work cannot be at the cost of the farmers. But it actually happened. Now, I hope that will be replicated across the 2 states, now in 1 state, then. No, you don't want to learn. The learning and listening that Arun is talking about. It is decentralized management in a responsible way. Education. Education in our state of Telangana, in both the Telugu states and across India, is a disaster. I don't want to go into details because if I get into education, I become so emotional and angry that I lose sense of time and I don't know how to then chide me or chastise me. But we all know. Suffices to say that we are disgraceful. 40% of children, about 30% of children in 8th grade are not able to read a second grade passage in government schools or private schools across the board in India, in all 600 plus districts of India. Massive surveys year after year. 40% plus children in 8th grade are not able to do a simple subtraction. 75 minus 46, let us say. 40% children in 8th grade are not able to do. 60% plus children are not able to do a simple division. 365 divided by 7, let us say, in 8th grade. These are real hard numbers. Incontrovertible, umpteen number of massive surveys across the country. You can do in any number of forms. That is the reality. And I can go on and on. We can easily set it right, but only if you localize the problem. Because we have the gross numbers, I know, but that doesn't mean much. Let me cite an example. Years ago, I was visiting Gopal and Aruna and others, and many friends in California, Bay Area. And I was traveling on a road called